He was just a little boy, dressed in a simple pair of gray sweatpants and a faded blue t-shirt, standing at the polished counter of the most exclusive firing range on the entire military base. They called it the Ares Tactical Center, a place where legends were forged and only the most elite operators were even allowed to clean their weapons. The boy, Leo, was practically invisible against the gleaming steel and imposing gear of the soldiers around him. His small frame a stark contrast to their hardened physiques. He had made a simple request, a quiet plea to his uncle who stood beside him, which was then relayed to the formidable man in charge. What happened next left everyone speechless. The soldiers, men who judged worth by the caliber of a weapon and the steel in a man's eyes, saw only a child. They had no idea they were looking at a prodigy, a boy who held a legacy of precision in his small hands. They never saw it coming. The laughter that echoed through the cavernous hall would soon turn to stunned silence, as this unassuming boy was about to shatter not just their prejudices, but every single shooting record their most revered Navy SEALs had ever set. This was not a story about a boy wanting to play with guns. It was the story of a promise being kept and a legend being born in the most unexpected of circumstances. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. The air in the Ares Tactical Center was thick with the scent of gun oil, sweat, and an almost religious reverence for firepower. This was not a place for civilians, much less children. It was the inner sanctum for the Tier 1 operators, a proving ground where the difference between life and death was measured in millimeters and milliseconds. Sergeant Frank Croft stood behind the main counter, his posture as rigid and unyielding as the polished steel of the service pistol holstered at his hip. He was a man carved from granite and arrogance, his tailored uniform immaculate, his signature tie a stark, blood-red slash against his crisp shirt. He considered himself the ultimate gatekeeper, a man with an unerring eye for who belonged and who did not. He prided himself on his ability to sniff out weakness, to separate the warriors from the wannabes. When the quiet, unassuming man in a contractor's polo shirt approached with a small boy in tow, Croft's internal alarms didn't just ring, they blared with contempt. The man, Leo's uncle, was polite, but there was a weariness in his eyes that Croft immediately misinterpreted as weakness. And the boy, Leo, was an anomaly, a glitch in the hyper-masculine, perfectly ordered world of the Ares Center. Dressed in clothes that looked like they were from a discount store, with a quiet and observant demeanor, he was everything Croft disdained, soft, out of place, and utterly insignificant. The request itself was almost laughable to Croft. The boy wanted to shoot, not at the public range on the other side of the base, but here, in his facility, among his men. The very idea was an insult to the hallowed ground he oversaw, an affront to the elite warriors who honed their godlike skills within these walls. He leaned forward, a smug, sneering expression slowly spreading across his face as he prepared to deliver the public humiliation he felt they so richly deserved. He was going to make an example of them, to reinforce the unbreachable walls of his exclusive world, and to remind everyone present that greatness was not for the likes of a little boy in sweatpants. The request, when it was finally verbalized by Leo's uncle, hung in the air like a bad joke. He would like to use one of the lanes, if possible, Sergeant, the uncle said, his voice calm and even, betraying no intimidation. Croft let the silence stretch, a cruel tactic he often employed to make people squirm. He scanned the cavernous room, his eyes locking with a few of his men. A silent communication passing between them. A shared smirk, a subtle shake of the head. The message was clear. Get a load of this. Croft finally turned his gaze back to the boy. Leo stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes not on Croft's sneering face, but on the advanced digital targeting system visible in the distance. He was not fidgeting or looking around in wide-eyed wonder like most children would. He was studying the equipment with a focused intensity that was unnerving. But Croft was too blinded by his own prejudice to notice. "Are you lost?" Croft asked, his voice dripping with condescending sweetness. It was his opening salvo. A rhetorical question designed to belittle. This facility is for a certain class of people. This is for professional soldiers, not for family outings. He gestured vaguely at Leo, as if the boy were a piece of trash someone had forgotten to throw away. Leo's uncle placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. We have authorization, and he is more than qualified. The uncle's quiet confidence only served to fuel Croft's derision. Authorization? Qualified? The man was clearly delusional. Croft let out a short, barking laugh. A few of the nearby soldiers, taking their cue from their superior, chuckled along. Qualified for what, exactly? Croft sneered. The video game arcade? We deal in reality here, sir. The tools we use are not toys. It was a performance, and Croft was playing to his audience of hardened operators. He was reinforcing the hierarchy, reminding them of their elite status by publicly shaming the outsiders who dared to trespass. Private Miller, a younger soldier who was cleaning his rifle at a nearby station, watched the unfolding scene with a growing sense of unease. He was new to the unit, still trying to earn the respect of men like Sergeant Croft, but his instincts screamed that something was wrong. Unlike the others, he saw past the boy's simple clothes. He noticed the stillness in Leo's posture, a disciplined calm that seemed out of place for a child. He saw the way Leo's eyes tracked the subtle movements of the soldiers in the room, not with fear, but with an analytical curiosity. Miller had grown up in the countryside, taught to shoot by a grandfather who believed that respect was earned through action, not through loud words or expensive gear. He saw a flicker of that same quiet competence in the small boy at the counter. Sergeant Croft, however, was doubling down on his condescending act. "People like you don't belong here," he said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is a place for warriors. It requires discipline, strength, a certain pedigree." He straightened his signature red tie, a symbolic gesture of reasserting his authority. He believed he was protecting the sanctity of his domain. But in reality, he was just being a bully. Leo, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke. His voice was not high-pitched or pleading, but steady and firm. "I am prepared to make a purchase," he said, misinterpreting the social dynamic and thinking the issue was one of commerce. He thought he needed to pay for the lane time. This innocent, direct statement, so devoid of the subtext of humiliation Croft was weaving, only made the sergeant laugh harder. "A purchase?" Croft bellowed, slapping the counter. "Son, you couldn't afford the ammunition we use here, let alone the time on this equipment." The humiliation arc was now in full swing, with Croft casting himself as the powerful gatekeeper and Leo as the unworthy supplicant. He was so sure of his judgment, so confident in his assessment based entirely on appearances, that he failed to see the quiet storm gathering in the small boy before him. The dynamic in the room began to shift. What started as a minor annoyance for Sergeant Croft was now becoming a matter of pride. He had publicly declared the boy unworthy, and now he had to prove it. The quiet insistence from Leo's uncle, combined with the boy's unnerving calm, was a challenge to his authority. He decided to humor them, a decision that would seal his fate. "All right," Croft announced to the room. A magnanimous, false smile plastered on his face. "Let's give the little guy a chance. We wouldn't want to be inhospitable." The undertone was thick with sarcasm. He turned to a subordinate. "Set up lane 1 with a standard 9mm pistol, and get the kid a step stool," he added, eliciting another round of snickers from his men. He led Leo and his uncle from the gleaming main hall into a smaller, more basic range, one they usually used for remedial training. The message was clear: "You are not worthy of our best equipment." He handled the pistol with exaggerated care, presenting it to Leo as if the boy had never seen a firearm before. "Now, this is a real gun, champ," Croft said, his voice patronizing. "It's not a toy. It makes a very loud noise, and it has a bit of a kick." He mimed the recoil with a goofy, theatrical jerk of his body. Private Miller trailed behind the group, his discomfort now morphing into a knot of shame in his stomach. He watched as Croft explained the absolute basics of firearm safety, speaking slowly and loudly, as if Leo were hard of hearing or mentally deficient. The other soldiers who had followed them were enjoying the show, their arms crossed, smug grins on their faces. They were predators circling what they perceived to be easy prey, eager to witness the inevitable failure and humiliation of the small, quiet boy who had dared to enter their world. The humiliation was a meticulously crafted performance. Sergeant Croft gathered a small crowd, pulling soldiers away from their training under the guise of a teachable moment. He wanted witnesses. He wanted the story of the lost little boy who cried when the gun went off to become a legend in the Ares Center, a cautionary tale for any other outsider who might get similar ideas. "All right, everyone, listen up," Croft boomed, his voice echoing in the confined space of the pistol range. "We have a guest today who wants to show us all how it's done." He winked at his men. "Let's give him our full attention and support." He placed the safety glasses on Leo's head, making a show of how they were too big, and then adjusted the ear protectors with a flourish. "Safety first, of course," he said, his tone suggesting it was all a ridiculous charade. He stood behind Leo, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders in a gesture that was meant to look helpful, but was, in fact, deeply patronizing and controlling. "Now, just squeeze the trigger gently, champ," he whispered, his breath hot on the boy's ear. "Don't be scared of the bang." The other soldiers leaned against the wall, their laughter barely suppressed. They were whispering among themselves, placing imaginary bets on how many shots it would take before the boy gave up, or if he would even be able to hit the paper target set up a mere 10 yards away. They saw a frail child in baggy sweatpants, a prop in Sergeant Croft's power play. They saw an easy target for their casual cruelty. What none of them saw, what they were incapable of seeing, was the boy's breathing. It was slow, rhythmic, and perfectly controlled. They didn't see the subtle shift in his stance as his feet found a perfect, balanced position. They didn't see the look in his eyes behind the oversized safety glasses, a look of intense, almost transcendental focus. They were so busy laughing at the boy they failed to recognize the master. Inside Leo's mind, the world went quiet. The sneering voice of Sergeant Croft, the muffled chuckles of the soldiers, the clinical hum of the ventilation system, it all faded into a distant, irrelevant buzz. All that remained was the weight of the pistol in his hands, the familiar scent of the propellant, and the image of the target in the distance. He was not on a military base, surrounded by arrogant men. He was back in the quiet woods behind his home, with his father. He could almost hear his father's voice, a calm and gentle whisper that had been his guide for as long as he could remember. "Breathe in, hold, breathe out. The gun is a part of you. The target is the only thing that exists. Don't think about the noise, don't think about the kick, think only about the destination." His father, Commander Marcus Thorne, had been a legend, a name spoken in hushed, reverent tones in places just like this. He had taught Leo not just how to shoot, but how to think, how to focus, how to find a place of absolute stillness in a world of chaos. This visit to the range was supposed to be a quiet pilgrimage, a way for Leo to feel close to the father he had lost 2 years ago. It wasn't about showing off, it was about honoring a memory. He took a deep, steadying breath, just as his father had taught him. The insults and the mockery were just noise, distractions. They were tests of his discipline, and he would not fail. His uncle, standing silently in the corner, watched with a sad, knowing look. He knew what was about to happen. He had seen it 100 times. He knew the legacy that flowed through the boy's veins, and he knew that these arrogant soldiers were about to learn a lesson in humility from the most unlikely of teachers. Leo raised the pistol. The movement was not hesitant or clumsy, as everyone expected. It was a single, fluid motion, executed with an economy and grace that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. The gun settled in his two-handed grip, perfectly aligned with the target, as if it were a natural extension of his own body. Sergeant Croft's smug commentary died in his throat. A flicker of surprise, quickly suppressed, crossed his face. He had expected the boy to struggle with the weight, to have his arms tremble. This was something else. Before Croft could utter another patronizing word, the first shot rang out. It was a sharp, clean crack that sliced through the condescending atmosphere. The recoil was absorbed by Leo's frame with a practiced ease that defied his small size. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He simply allowed the weapon to cycle, his focus remaining entirely downrange. On the paper target, a single, perfect hole appeared directly in the center of the bullseye. A fluke, Croft thought instantly. A lucky shot. But then the second shot rang out, and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth. Each one followed the other in a steady, rhythmic cadence, and each bullet passed through the exact same hole as the first, creating a single, ragged perforation in the dead center of the target. It was a grouping so tight it was almost unbelievable. A feat of marksmanship that many of the seasoned operators watching would have been proud to achieve after a full day of warming up. The casual chatter and snickering from the soldiers died instantly, replaced by a stunned, disbelieving silence. They stared at the target, then at the small boy, then back at the target. The world had just been turned upside down. The joke was over. Sergeant Croft's face, which had been a mask of smug superiority, was now a canvas of confusion and anger. The humiliation he had so carefully orchestrated had backfired spectacularly. The boy was not supposed to be good. He was supposed to be a failure. A punchline. This display of impossible skill was a direct challenge to his judgment, an affront to his authority. He could not accept it. His professional veneer began to crack, revealing the desperation underneath. "That's enough," he snapped, his voice sharp and loud. "The pistol range is clearly too simple for a prodigy like you." The word prodigy was laced with venomous sarcasm. He was trying to regain control of the narrative, to frame the boy's success as an anomaly that could be explained away by the simplicity of the test. He needed Leo to fail, and he needed him to fail publicly. "If you're as good as you seem to think you are," Croft continued, his eyes narrowing, "let's see how you handle a real challenge. Let's move to the advanced combat range." A murmur went through the assembled soldiers. The advanced combat range, known as the Crucible, was where SEAL qualification courses were run. It was a sophisticated, multi-million-dollar setup with moving targets, variable distances, stress-inducing light and sound effects, and pressure plates that tracked a shooter's movement. It was designed to push the world's most elite soldiers to their absolute limits. Records set in the Crucible were the stuff of legend, held by operators whose names were whispered with awe. Taking a child into the Crucible was absurd. It was like asking a Little League player to step into the batter's box in the World Series. Croft was not just raising the stakes, he was creating a scenario where failure was a certainty. He smiled, a cold, predatory expression returning to his face. This was his checkmate. He would expose the boy as a one-trick pony and re-establish his dominance. He had no idea he was leading the boy not to a stage for failure, but to a throne. The Crucible was a different world. The air was colder, the lighting dimmer, and the silence more profound. It was a theater of tactical challenges, a labyrinth of steel walls, pop-up targets, and digital screens that displayed impossibly complex shooting scenarios. Sergeant Croft strode into the control booth with a renewed sense of purpose. He was in his element here. With a few taps on a touchscreen monitor, he activated the most difficult SEAL qualification course on record, Program Delta 7. "This is the drill that separates the men from the boys," Croft announced over the intercom, his voice booming through the cavernous space. He made sure to look directly at Leo as he said it. "It tests for speed, precision under pressure, threat identification, and tactical movement." The course record is held by Commander Thorne himself, a true legend. No one has come close to breaking it in over 5 years. He said the name Thorne with a reverence that bordered on worship, completely unaware of the profound irony of his words. He was using the legacy of Leo's own father as the impossible standard he expected the boy to fail. To the soldiers now crowding the observation window, this had gone from a mild amusement to a high-stakes drama. They knew Delta 7. They had all attempted it. Most had failed it multiple times. It was a brutal, unforgiving test of skill that had broken many a hardened operator. They watched as Leo's uncle helped the boy into a tactical vest, adjusting the straps, and handed him a customized M4 rifle that looked far too large for his small frame. Croft smirked from the control booth. The rifle was calibrated for an adult. The recoil would be difficult to manage. The sheer physicality of the course would exhaust him in seconds. The humiliation would be swift, total, and undeniable. His authority would be restored, and the natural order of the world would be set right once more. Leo took his position at the starting line, the cold weight of the M4 rifle resting in his hands. He ignored the stares of the soldiers in the observation booth and the smug, watchful eyes of Sergeant Croft. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, shutting out the intimidating environment of the crucible. Once again, he was not here. He was in a different place, a different time. He was with his father, standing in a field at dusk, the scent of pine and damp earth in the air. Feel the balance of the rifle. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Don't fight it. Let it become a part of you. See the course in your mind before you take the first step. Know where you are going. Know what you have to do. The clock is a distraction. The noise is a distraction. There is only you, the rifle, and the targets. Everything else is fog. He opened his eyes. The fog was gone. The intimidating maze of steel and wires was no longer a chaotic jumble, but a clear, predictable path. He could see the sequence of targets, anticipate their movements, and plan his own with an intuitive clarity that was beyond training. It was instinct. It was legacy. The whispers in the observation booth had ceased. The soldiers were no longer a pack of hyenas waiting for a kill. They were now a silent, watchful jury, their skepticism warring with a dawning sense of awe. Even Private Miller, who had hoped the boy would do well, found himself holding his breath. He had never seen anyone, let alone a child, face the infamous Delta 7 with such profound, unnerving calm. In the control booth, Sergeant Croft leaned forward, his finger hovering over the start button. His smug smile was still in place, but a tiny, persistent bead of sweat had begun to trace a path down his temple. He was ready to witness the failure he had engineered. He pressed the button, a deafening buzzer sounded, and the crucible roared to life. The moment the buzzer sounded, Leo did not hesitate. He moved. It was not the frantic, clumsy scramble of a child, but a fluid, economical explosion of motion. He flowed through the course like water, his small size becoming an advantage as he navigated the low barriers and tight corners. The first set of targets, 3 hostile pop-ups at 15 yards, appeared simultaneously. Before the mechanism had even fully locked them into place, 3 shots rang out from the M4. Pop, pop, pop. 3 perfect center mass hits, delivered in less than a second. In the observation booth, a collective gasp went through the crowd of soldiers. The speed and accuracy were breathtaking. On the digital display, Leo's split time for the first engagement was already in the green, tracking faster than the record. Sergeant Croft stared at the monitor, his jaw tight. He dismissed it as beginner's luck, an initial burst of adrenaline. The course was long and grueling. The boy would tire. He would make a mistake. As Leo advanced, the challenges became more complex. Targets appeared at varying distances, interspersed with no-shoot civilian targets that required instantaneous threat identification. A target would appear for a fraction of a second in a darkened doorway 50 yards away. Leo's rifle would be up, a shot fired, and the target neutralized before most of the operators watching had even registered its presence. He moved with an almost preternatural awareness of the space around him, reloading not with haste, but with a serene, practiced efficiency that wasted not a single motion. The soldiers watched, their professional pride forgotten, replaced by a raw, unadulterated admiration. They were witnessing something that defied explanation. They were watching a master at work, and the master was a 10-year-old boy in a faded blue t-shirt. The silence in the observation booth was now one of reverence. They were no longer watching a spectacle. They were attending a symphony of precision and skill. The first record fell without fanfare. It was the record for the hostage rescue segment of the course, a notoriously difficult drill that required 5 precision headshots on targets partially obscured by no-shoot friendlies, all within 3 seconds. The previous record, held by a legendary SEAL sniper, had been 2.8 seconds. Leo cleared it in 2.3. A new record flashed on the main screen in bright green letters. New course segment record. In the control booth, Sergeant Croft physically recoiled from the monitor as if it had struck him. He brought up the sensor data, his hands trembling slightly as he tapped on the screen. He was looking for an error, a calibration issue, a glitch in the system. Anything to explain what he was seeing. There was none. The system was functioning perfectly. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to settle in his gut. This was not a fluke. This was not a trick. This was real. His entire worldview, his carefully constructed hierarchy of skill and appearance, was being systematically dismantled by a small child. He felt his authority, the very foundation of his identity at the Ares Center, crumbling to dust. He watched, frozen, as Leo continued his flawless run through the crucible. The boy was not just completing the course, he was dissecting it, mastering it in a way Croft had never seen before. He was not simply meeting the standard, he was becoming the standard. The smugness on Croft's face had long since vanished, replaced by a pale, waxy sheen of disbelief and fear. The jeering crowd of soldiers he had assembled to witness a humiliation was now bearing witness to his own. The records continued to fall, one after another, in a relentless cascade of shattering achievements. The urban assault time, the long-range engagement accuracy score, the tactical reload speed, each one was obliterated. The old numbers on the leaderboard, replaced by the boy's impossible new metrics. The soldiers in the observation booth were no longer silent. They were now openly cheering, calling out encouragement, their voices filled with the pure, unadulterated joy of witnessing greatness. They had completely forgotten their earlier mockery, swept up in the historic performance unfolding before them. Private Miller was beaming, his face alight with a vindicated pride. He felt a profound sense of rightness, as if the world, for a moment, had corrected itself, rewarding true substance over superficial style. The final challenge of the Delta 7 program was the most daunting. A single shot at a 1-inch target from 100 yards, fired from an unstable platform after a full physical sprint. It was a test of an operator's ability to control their heart rate and breathing under extreme physical duress. Commander Thorne's legendary shot had hit the very edge of the target, securing his record. Leo completed the sprint, his breathing only slightly elevated. He mounted the unstable platform, took a single, calming breath, and fired. On the monitor, the camera zoomed in on the target. The bullet hole was not on the edge. It was in the exact geometric center, a perfect shot that seemed to mock the very concept of difficulty. The final course time flashed on the main screen, a full 12 seconds faster than Commander Thorne's unbreakable record. The room erupted. Soldiers were clapping, shouting, shaking their heads in utter disbelief. They had just witnessed a legend being surpassed. It was in that moment of triumphant chaos that a new figure appeared at the back of the observation booth. He was tall, with silver hair and the quiet, commanding presence of a man long accustomed to authority. On his uniform, above a chest full of medals, were the stars of a general. It was General Vance, the base commander. He had been alerted to a potential security breach at the Ares Center, an unauthorized civilian on the advanced range. He had come, expecting to deal with a problem. Instead, he looked at the name on the screen, then at the small boy in the crucible, and a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. General Vance walked through the throng of stunned soldiers, his eyes fixed on the small figure of Leo, who was now carefully unloading the M4 rifle and placing it on the rack, just as he had been taught. The general ignored the salutes and the stammered greetings of the men. He walked directly into the control booth, where Sergeant Croft stood as if he had been turned to stone, his face ashen, his eyes locked on the record-shattering scores on the monitor. "Sergeant," General Vance said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. Croft flinched, turning slowly to face the commander. He opened his mouth to speak, to explain, but no words came out. "I was told there was a problem here," the general continued, his gaze sweeping over the scene. "But it seems to me the only problem is a severe and profound lapse in judgment." He then walked out of the booth and onto the range, approaching Leo. He knelt down, so he was at eye level with the boy. "Leo," he said, his voice softening with a warmth and affection that stunned the watching soldiers. "You handle that rifle just like he did. Your father would be so incredibly proud of you right now." The revelation hit the room with the force of a physical blow. The name on the record screen, Thorn, clicked into place. This was not just some random prodigal child. This was Leo Thorn, the son of the very legend whose record he had just annihilated. The visit to the range, which Croft had treated as a pathetic imposition, was now cast in a new, heartbreaking light. It was a son trying to connect with his fallen father. The soldiers looked at each other, a collective wave of shame washing over them. Their casual cruelty, their arrogant mockery, was not just an insult to a child. It had been a deep and profound dishonor to the memory of a fallen hero, a man they all revered. General Vance stood up and turned to face the assembled soldiers, his expression now hard as flint. His gaze, however, was fixed solely on the pale, trembling Sergeant Croft. "Sergeant," the general began, his voice dangerously calm, "Commander Marcus Thorn was more than a legend. He was a friend. He was the epitome of what a warrior should be: skilled, yes, but also humble, respectful, and possessed of a character that judged a man by his actions, not by the clothes he wore or the rank on his collar." Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling what little remained of Croft's composure. The general walked slowly toward him, his steps measured and deliberate. Commander Thorn personally requested that upon his death, his son, Leo, be given access to this facility whenever he wished. He wanted his son to have a place to remember him, to feel connected to the world he was a part of. That authorization, which you so arrogantly dismissed, came from my office. It seems you didn't bother to check. Croft visibly wilted, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The signature red tie that he wore as a symbol of his authority now looked like a noose. "You did not see a visitor today, Sergeant," the general continued, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "You saw an opportunity to bully a child. You saw a chance to puff up your own ego by tearing down someone you deemed lesser. You not only failed to show basic human decency, you failed as a leader. You have dishonored yourself, you have dishonored this facility, and you have dishonored the memory of a great man." The silence in the room was absolute. There was no defense, no excuse. The comeuppance was not loud or explosive. It was a quiet, thorough, and devastating indictment of a man's character, delivered with surgical precision. The consequences for Sergeant Croft were not what anyone expected. General Vance was a man who believed in building people up, not just tearing them down. Simple termination was too easy. A lesson had to be learned, and more importantly, it had to be taught. "You will not be discharged, Sergeant," the general declared, his voice resonating with finality in the now silent range. "That would be a waste. Instead, you are being reassigned. Effective immediately, you will be in charge of a new pilot program for incoming recruits. It will be an introductory course focused entirely on the core values of this institution: humility, respect, and the critical importance of looking beyond superficial appearances to identify true potential." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the soldiers. It was a brilliant, almost poetic form of justice. Croft, the man who had so utterly failed this fundamental test of character, would now be responsible for teaching it to others. His punishment was to become the living embodiment of the lesson he desperately needed to learn. "You will use this incident," the general continued, gesturing toward Leo, "as your primary case study. You will tell every new soldier who comes through these doors the story of the small boy you underestimated. You will explain, in detail, your arrogance, your prejudice, and the profound humiliation of being proven so spectacularly wrong. Your path to redemption, Sergeant, will be paved with the repeated telling of your own failure. It is my hope that in teaching this lesson to others, you will finally learn it yourself." Croft stood there, stripped of his pride and his authority, but given something he didn't deserve: a chance. It was not a simple punishment, it was a challenge, a long and arduous assignment designed to rebuild his character from the ground up. He would have to confront his own arrogance every single day, turning his greatest shame into his most important mission. 1 year later, the Ares Tactical Center was a changed place. The atmosphere was still one of intense professionalism, but the undercurrent of arrogant elitism had vanished, replaced by a more watchful, open-minded culture. The story of Leo Thorne was now a foundational piece of the center's lore, a mandatory lesson for every soldier who entered. In a classroom filled with new recruits, a different Sergeant Croft stood before them. The tailored suit was gone, replaced by a standard-issue uniform. The signature tie was nowhere to be seen. He was leaner, his face etched with a humility that had been entirely absent before. His voice, once dripping with condescension, was now steady and earnest. "Look around you," he said to the young, eager faces. "You are the best of the best. But that does not give you the right to look down on anyone. True strength is not about how you look or the gear you carry. It's about what's inside." He then began to tell them a story. His own story. He spoke of a small, quiet boy in sweatpants. He did not spare himself, detailing his own smugness, his sneering remarks, his utter conviction that he was right. He recounted the stunned silence, the falling records, and the profound, soul-crushing shame of his failure. He was not just giving a lecture, he was baring his soul, offering his own humiliation as a lesson for them. Private Miller, now Corporal Miller, stood at the back of the room, a respectful nod acknowledging his former superior. Miller had been promoted and now assisted Croft with the new program, a testament to the fact that his quiet decency had been recognized and rewarded. The change was real, it was systemic, and it had all started with one boy. The final, most poignant change was on the range itself. The state-of-the-art facility, once informally known as Croft's Kingdom, had been officially rededicated. A gleaming bronze plaque now hung at the entrance to the crucible, which read, "The Commander Marcus Thorne Memorial Range." It was a permanent reminder of the man whose legacy of skill and character now defined the institution. General Vance stood with Leo on the observation deck, looking down at the range. Below, Corporal Miller was patiently mentoring a young, nervous-looking recruit, helping him with his stance. The culture of mentorship and identifying potential, regardless of its packaging, had taken root. Leo was no longer just a visitor. He was a part of the place, a living symbol of its new philosophy. He would come by on weekends, not to shatter records, but to help. To quietly offer a word of advice to a struggling soldier, sharing the lessons his father had taught him. The story was complete. The humble protagonist had not sought revenge, but had inspired positive, systemic change. The arrogant antagonist had not been destroyed, but had been given a path to redemption and had become a better man for it. The institution itself had learned and grown, forever changed by the day. A small boy reminded them all what true strength looked like. The tale served as a powerful parable, a testament to the idea that worth is not determined by appearance, but by the content of one's character and the scale of one's abilities. What is the true measure of a person? Is it the uniform they wear, or the quiet dignity with which they carry themselves? The next time you find yourself judging someone based on a first impression, remember the story of Leo Thorne. You never know when you might be standing in the presence of a humble powerhouse, a hidden genius about to leave you speechless. Share this story if you believe that true worth lies within, and tell us in the comments about a time you witnessed someone defy all expectations.